My fellow Americans, welcome back. It's September in D.C. I'm not going to say that August was quiet. It's quieter, but we're back. It's September. Things are going to start getting rocking and rolling here in very short order. The tail end of the year in D.C., Q4 of the calendar, is crazy busy. And forget about everything the White House is doing. Like, this is just a crazy White House that's doing more than some presidents do in 4 years in like 8-9 months. Let's start at the top. White House NSC, White House and National Security Council. So over August, there was a multinational leaders event that focused specifically on Ukraine. Donald Trump, President Zelensky, bunch of other European leaders. At the surface, that looks pretty legit. You're getting all your people together, talking about what's going on in Ukraine. Awesome. Funny story. Apparently, Trump stepped out of that meeting to talk to President Putin. Either way, point of this one is Ukraine is still on the table. If you go back maybe a year ago, a lot of people were hedging, a lot of companies were hedging their technology on continued operations in Ukraine, right? Is this something that continues on and on? Does this exist as almost a modern battlefield testing ground? Is this the place where we do operational test and evaluation of things? Very similar to what we were doing in the Middle East for years. Russia's been very good at using, conflicts in Syria specifically as test grounds for new equipment. Is this going to be a place of innovation and adoption? And is this going to be a place where small businesses thrive? That's been a bumpy road, as we haven't really known where this administration is going to get or is going to fall on the issue of Ukraine. It seems to be on an okay path at this point. We seem to be continuing negotiations with Ukraine for security assistance and other partnership programs going forward. I would personally not hedge my time, effort, resources on continued operations in Ukraine of any significant amount for small businesses. They seem to be developing their own organic industrial base, especially when it comes down to smaller things. Think FPV drones, electronic warfare, things like that. Larger players that are making munitions, stuff like that, I'm sure they'll be fine. I don't really care about them, but it's good for the country, so good for them, right? But very specifically, I wouldn't over-index on activities in Ukraine or even the technologies that you're seeing right now. The use of drones at all scales, but specifically the first person view drone, the FPV drone, has been new in the character of war that we saw in Ukraine and in Russia, which is great. But as you start thinking about that in larger applications, yes, do I believe that the first person view drone will be as synonymous as a rifle, pistol, or handgun going future? Yes, I absolutely do. Do I see it having the same outsized impact as it did in the early days of the conflict in Ukraine? Absolutely not. And when we start thinking about how to apply technology from the Ukraine-Russia conflict into Indo-PACOM, we need to think about distance, right? Distance is going to be the critical factor here. Russia-Ukraine conflict is a land war with neighboring nations. The Pacific is a whole lot of water, and last time I checked, no one's able to really do a first-person view drone that's utilizing fiber optic control to get away from the electronic warfare threats that can go, 1,000 nautical miles. Just saying. So, in the case of Ukraine, I wouldn't over-index, but there is progress, and it seems to be that we are continuing to move forward in a partnership way. So there is some opportunity there. I wouldn't go nuts on that. All right. Other things happening at the White House level. President Trump wants to rename the DOD, the Department of Defense, the Department of War. Is this crazy? No, that's what it was all the way up until 1949. When they changed the name because, they went through rebranding and World War II was over and we were like, okay, cool. We're not going to have to fight any wars anymore because we're all going to be friends. We're not. The Cold War happened, then Desert Storm happened, and then we've been at war or not in conflict, whatever you want to call it, in the Middle East for 20 plus years. So Donald Trump wants to go back to the Department of War. Does that really matter? Yes, no. Well, one, it will take a Congress to do that change. You can't change a military or you can't change a government department's name. Congress has to do that. The president's not going to run into any political hurdles doing that because it's a unitary government and everyone's Republican right now. And this is not something you want to go to war with the president over if you're on that side of the aisle. So that seems like an easy win that Congress get that across the board. Now, why does that actually matter? Well, I'm sure to a lot of people it doesn't. If you are in defense and defense technology and working around the DoD, soon to be the Department of War, this is a signal to you that words matter. Secretary Hegseth has been very clear in his terminology that he uses that very much differentiates this administration, this Department of Defense, even from the first Trump administration Department of Defense. Secretary Hegseth has come out and has explicitly used words like warfighters, lethality. This is just a rebranding for this administration to focus the Department of Defense on its goal, which is deterring and, if required, defending the nation in war, right? People die. It's war. It's not defense. Yes, there's a defense element. We want to defend the homeland. We want to defend and deter our troops abroad and our national interests abroad. But at the end of the day, the pointy end of the stick is if you fuck around, you will find out and we will kill you. And that happens in the Department of War. So why does that matter? If you are working with the Department of Defense or want to be working with the Department of Defense, look at your language in your decks, in your proposals, in your website, the way that you and your other colleagues at your company that have a public presence discuss what you do. You should be weaving in the words lethality, warfighter, Chinese Communist Party, adversary. You have to be upfront and honest that whether it makes you feel funny inside or not, your technology is likely going to kill people, and everybody needs to be okay with that. This is a departure from the idea that, well, not the idea, but the time, maybe 5 or so years back when you had, a couple people walk out of Google because they didn't want to be part of Maven. And then it's like, oh, Silicon Valley doesn't want to work with DoD. Like that was, I don't think that was ever actually real. But even if it was, that's over. And its pendulum has swung the complete other direction, that you need to be on brand. And you need to be very real about what you're doing with your technology, because if you use this squishy kind of PC, I don't want to hurt people's feelings languages, that shit's just not going to fly. And that's the indicator that you need to take from a renaming of the Department of War. Does it really matter to you at the end of the day? No, but get the message, be on brand, and understand that at least for the next 3 years, whoever is running this country is laser focused on lethality and defeating the enemy in war. Okay, so Congress. First, disclaimer for all of the staff, the members, the former staff. There's this weird public perception that Congress goes on a month-long summer break. Okay, for anyone who has not dealt with Congress, that is fundamentally false. Yes, they are not in D.C., and yes, there is no legislative activities. That does not mean they are not working. I'm going to be honest with you. From like the junior staffer all the way up to the member, these folks put in a good 10 to 12 hours every single day, regardless whether they're in session or not. So just want to put that away. It's like, it's not summer break where they're going to like some camp and hanging out and having martinis and shit. Like, they're back home in their district, dealing with their constituents, going to town halls, meeting with people, and like getting screamed at in the street. So it's like, it's not like they're just chilling. Anyways, I digress. Everyone is about to become an expert on some new words that they're going to throw around flagrantly. Most people aren't going to know what they're talking about. I might even screw them up. This is the nonsense of DC, right? We have our own language and things happen. But you have to know this language if you're going to deal with the government, with DOD, with DC. So we got some new words that everybody should be learning this week if you don't already know them. Continuing resolution, also known as a CR, impoundment, rescission, and shutdown. Okay, so start at the top. CR, a continuing resolution. The House came back, or the Congress came back Monday, beginning of September, and started discussing the continuing resolution. A continuing resolution, unfortunately, is a process that we undergo every year wherein the Congress does not do its constitutionally mandated responsibility of passing all 12 appropriations bills before the end of the fiscal year, which expires at 11:59 and 59 seconds on September 30th. And they have to extend the funding window into the next fiscal year. So you're going to hear people say things like a clean CR. A clean CR means we're just going to keep doing what we were doing yesterday. No changes. I don't know if we've ever truly passed a clean CR. A CR is meant to buy time for the members of Congress to continue negotiations, figure out what the bills look like. At this point, as of today in Washington, D.C., there is not even a top line. They haven't even negotiated the, we are going to spend $1 trillion on defense level number, let alone what goes all the way down and down and down and down into the budget, all the way down into some items that have budget lines that are, less than $10 million, which are couch cushion money when you're dealing with $1 trillion budget. So there's still a lot of work to do. My guess, this is always the problem about recording things. My guess right now is our best case scenario is a Christmas miracle where the defense bill gets passed before Christmas. That's best case scenario. Realistically, we're probably looking at Q1 calendar year 26. Just my thoughts right now, given that we don't have top lines and we're less than 30 days away from the end of the fiscal year. So anyways, a clean CR is going to take funding from yesterday and just continue it. That normally never happens, but the closest thing you'll get to a clean CR is a clean CR with a few anomalies. An anomaly is an addition to your clean CR for very, very, very high level national security, typically, purposes. So let's say a critical part of the Columbia class sub was moving from RDT&E dollars, research, development, testing, and engineering, into procurement dollars. By the rules and the laws governing a continuing resolution, you can't change your color of money in a CR because that's not a continuation. If you were spending RDT&E dollars yesterday, you have to continue spending RDT&E dollars tomorrow. If you want to change to proc dollars, that's a change. And for critical national security issues like moving from RDT&E into proc for a critical element of a national level program like the new Columbia class sub, you would have a carve out for that says, okay, spend everything you were spending yesterday, except you can now do this. Those are anomalies. And don't go running back to the other people in your company or your consultants or your lobbyists being like, you need to go get me an anomaly. That's not happening. These are for national level programs only. This is like we need to extend the spending on our nuclear arsenal type shit. This is not your thing that you do is going to somehow get a carve out in an anomaly. It's not happening. Continuing resolutions also do not allow new starts, which is where this becomes really problematic. If you have a program that is set to start, whether that be RDT&E, O&M, proc, doesn't matter. If it is uniquely and distinctly new for the next fiscal year, and even if you've been awarded, that you can't spend that money. No new starts under a CR. So now, if you know you've already got something lined up to start in fiscal 26 that's going to expend fiscal 26 dollars, that doesn't start until the 26 appropriations bill is passed. I go back to Christmas miracle, best case scenario. So that's a CR. It's a continuation of spending beyond the fiscal year that is negotiated in Congress and has to be passed into law. In absence of a CR being negotiated and passed, we get government shutdown. So I've said this before, I'll say it again. Professor Mike, every session of Congress, in a 2-year session of Congress, are typically 20,000 pieces of legislation that are introduced. Most of them never stand to see the light of day. A lot of them are just messaging bills that members of Congress put out to talk to their constituents and say, hey, look, this is something I care about. Is that the right way to do it? Who knows? But it is. That's what happens. At the end of a session of Congress, there's typically about 200-ish laws that actually get passed. About a third of them are naming buildings and post offices and mountaintops and federal something or other after someone. Really, in a 2-year session of Congress, you pass about maybe 100 substantive pieces of legislation. 12 of them have to be the 12 appropriations bills that govern the budget of our federal agencies, or they shut down straight up. Hook, line, and sinker. They just close their doors. They go to minimal essential personnel and they shut the fucking doors. Yeah, that's bad. Yes. Tracking. Yes. Very bad. A CR prevents that from happening, but you still need to negotiate and pass a CR as a law. CR's bad. Shutdown's worse. Okay. So you're like, well, why wouldn't they just pass a CR? Why wouldn't they just pass their bills on time and do their homework? I mean, the fiscal year shows up at the same time every year. They've been here since January. Why don't we have a bill? I don't know. Well, I do know there's a lot of reasons, and it is incredibly complex. But why don't they just pass a CR? Well, typically, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, regardless of who is in charge, wants to avoid a CR. And then everybody blames everybody else. It's your fault, right? But they usually get the job done. There's also the inherent politics of everything going on here that come January 1st, we're in an election year, ladies and gentlemen. We are back to the midterm elections. And man, there's a lot of stuff going on there that I'm not even going to touch, to include redistricting and all kinds of stuff going on at the political side of this. But no one really wants to go into an election year asking people for their money and their votes when it is blatantly obvious that they had not done their job from a previous year. So people usually the members of Congress try to get that across the finish line before January rolls around and they have to start campaigning. 2 highly complicating issues. First, reconciliation. Reconciliation happened earlier this year, also known as the Big Beautiful Bill. It went backwards in previously passed funding bills and found all the money that wasn't yet obligated and moved it from where it was and moved it into something that this president wanted. That typically happens at the change of an administration. It's usually not the reconciliations usually aren't as big as what we saw in the Big Beautiful Bill. They're usually not as focused on national security and defense as this one was, but they typically happen at changes of administrations. You can claw back some of the money that the guy before you put in there, and you can work it out, and great. Reconciliation does not make the other side of the aisle happy, right? We just start there. Like, all of the Democrats don't want the Trump administration and the Republican Congress to take the money out of the things that they put in, but that's just the nature of the beast around here. So the problem is, when you try to pass a CR, you typically say, oh my God, national security, if we don't pass the CR, we're not going to have bombs and bullets, and the troops aren't going to get paid, and can't do training, and we have no new starts. And all of that is very true. Having been in uniform during CRs and working for the government in CRs and now being out and living through CRs, they suck for everyone up and down the chain. But the problem this year is they have billions of dollars in reconciliation that are currently executable and are good for 5 years. So you really lose the kind of urgency factor of, oh my God, you have to pass this bill or everyone's going to die, because you have billions and billions of dollars at the DoD on hand to spend to deal with those issues without that bill getting passed. That is a complicating factor to this, but not probably the most acute complicating factor. It's another fun word that we're all going to learn, and it's called rescissions. If reconciliation goes back in previously passed spending bills and moves money that's not yet obligated to other things, rescission is when an administration stops payment. Actually, when the administration does it, the executive branch, it's called an impoundment. And there is an Impoundment Control Act that has been developed over time. Famously under Richard Nixon, he wanted to end the Department of Education, so he just stopped spending money on it. Well, the Impoundment Control Act said, actually, you can't do that. Congress, Article 1, Section 9, no funds will be drawn from the Treasury without the appropriation of Congress. Congress has a constitutionally mandated responsibility of funding the government, and the president can't just decide to not spend the money. When he doesn't spend the money, it's called an impoundment, and the Impoundment Control Act requires certain things to happen. One of them being sending a rescission package to the Congress, and the Congress is then supposed to pass or not pass the rescission package, giving or not giving the president the authority to stop spending those previously appropriated dollars. That's a lot. Tracking. Reconciliation moves old money to different places. Impoundment. President stops spending on things. Rescission. Congress says that's okay. When you do a reconciliation, you're not making friends. But there's an argument to be made that why haven't you obligated the dollars yet? Right? If it was so important that you wanted to do it back in the day, and the Congress, 1, 2, 3 years back, respective to the type of money, if Congress gave you the money and you have not yet obligated it and put it on contract, well, did you really need it? Were you just padding your books? Maybe this is something that we can move around. Maybe priorities have changed and you didn't yet spend it. We can move it to something else. Okay, so maybe there's good reasons to do this. Impoundment and rescission is a sharp stick in the eye to everyone who wants those things to happen, because you're stopping stuff like right now and you're like, yeah, too bad, so sad. We're not going to spend that money. The first Trump rescission package came in over the August break in the last couple of weeks. It was about $4.9 billion. Now, most of this came out of foreign aid. So this is just the outcome and the continuation of the dust up that you saw over USAID, World Health Program, or World Health Organization, World Food Program, all of these kinds of international organizations that this administration is gutting. That's where all those rescissions came from. Yes, people are mad. They're going to be. Certain people like those things to happen, and they get mad when they don't. First rescission package, mostly foreign aid, about $4.9 billion. The Impoundment and Control Act of 1974 has a stipulation in there that Congress has 45 days to review a rescission package. Sorry, I got to cut that out. The Impoundment Control Act of 1974 says that Congress has 45 days to review a rescission package. One rescission package has already been passed into law. $4.95 billion has been cut out of foreign aid. Well, there's another fun term that we have in Washington, D.C., and this is called a pocket rescission. Oh, Mike, what's the difference between a rescission and a pocket rescission? Pocket rescission is similar to, if you remember in civics school, if they still teach that in schools when you went to school, there's also a pocket veto that the president can do. There's a time of where the president has to decide to pass or veto a law. And if it sits for too long, it just dies. Well, that's a pocket veto. So what do you think a pocket rescission is? A pocket rescission is when the president sends a rescission package to Congress with less than 45 days in the fiscal year, and by Congress not doing anything about it, and there being a current impoundment on those dollars, it just doesn't get spent. You can just assume that it's all rescinded. And that's what happens in a pocket veto. Basically, September, I decide I don't want to spend any more money. It's almost nothing short of going to the Supreme Court or something like that they're going to be able to do. So there's another $5 billion-ish in rescission that the Congress isn't going to touch because they don't need to. The president's not going to spend because it's currently impounded. and the other side of the aisle is losing their shit. So between not having a national security imperative to pass a bill this year because we have trillions of dollars in reconciliation, and the Trump administration continually jamming a sharp stick in the eye of the Democrats to the tune of about $10 billion in rescissions, the chances that the Democrats are going to come to the table to maybe even pass a CR, period, and not put the Trump administration government into a full-blown shutdown is highly questionable. So, August was kind of quiet in D.C. Welcome back. At this point, we're at the race to the end of the fiscal year. We're going to see what happens. Shutdown, CR, more rescissions. Who the hell knows? That's where we're at right now, where this all at the end of the day matters to you. If you're doing something that could be categorized as one of the many funding streams in reconciliation, you're probably going to be okay. If you have a new start in fiscal $26, that's not starting until 26 appropriations bill is passed. If you went up and talked to your member of Congress and you told them that the DOD is not spending enough money on the thing that you do, and your member of Congress put more money in the appropriations bill for you, that money does not show up until the appropriations bill is passed. Right now, we are living in the midst of a year-long CR. Nobody knows that. Why? Because the CR that was passed for the remainder of the fiscal year of 25 encompasses the House passed appropriations bill and the Senate report on defense. They just said, okay, put these two together. We'll pass that as a CR. So essentially, they passed a bill without having to take it to conference. In those cases, if your new start or your congressional ad was not explicitly called out in one of those two documents and were in a year-long CR, your new starts aren't going. So know where you are in the funding stream, know what kind of money you have, know what contracts you have that draw from the different years of money. Talk to your contracting officers, understand what implications a CR or a shutdown will be on work that you have on your board of getting ready to start in your pipeline, and contracts that you think you're going to be able to invoice on that you may or may not in the near term or maybe potentially ever. And now on to the DoD, my favorite. In August, the DoD kicked off an exercise called Northern Edge. I bring that up only for the fact that if you're not tracking exercises, Northern Edge, Northern Strike, Red Flag, Bala-Katang, Cobra Gold, Project Convergence, and you're not trying to get your things into these exercises and you're not trying to participate into these exercises, you're missing a huge, possibly the hugest opportunity to put your thing in the hands of the warfighter, let them use it, and let them give you feedback. Right? These are the places where you don't get to hold your widget anymore. You have to go give it to Sergeant Mike, the Marine, who is going to break everything, and he's going to take it out into the field for a week. And when it comes back, if it comes back, you'll know if your thing is good or not. Right? As we move more into the world of experimentation with what you see out of the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering and the Mission Capabilities Office, the T-Rex series, the Raptor series. This is experimentation where they put the things in the hands of the people who use them to make sure that they actually work. It's genius. You're like, no, duh, why don't you do that? Well, for a long time, we didn't. The DoD is moving more in that direction. These exercises are your ways to get experimentation and user feedback. If this is not on your calendar and your roadmap and you don't have someone tracking exercises and a way to get in them, you're wrong. Also at the DoD, an issue that is near and dear to my heart, the organization known as the Defense Innovation Unit. The Defense Innovation Unit originally stood up right around 2015 by Secretary Ash Carter to bring the commercial technology sector, specifically in Silicon Valley, closer to the DoD. It's grown from a $40 million organization to a $1 billion organization over time as people in Congress and the DoD realized that buying commercially available technology made by all of our amazing, innovative companies across the United States of America, utilizing tools like commercial solutions openings. So they just tell you what the problem they want to solve is, and you can tell them how you're going to solve it. And using contracting vehicles like OTAs, other transaction authorities, have kind of set a precedent for hopefully the whole way that the DoD goes about doing business, but DIU as a forerunner of that was very good at this. It's an organization that has grown with great support. Over the summer, the director of DIU stepped down. There's no further details there. Mr. Doug Beck was the vice president of Apple. He was a Navy reservist, intel officer, has a lot of experience in the SOCOM and JSOC community. He decided to step down. Don't know why. Don't care. Doug, thanks for your service. Now, we move on. The Undersecretary of Research and Engineering has taken control of the acting position of the DIU director. This is interesting because a few years back, DIU was pulled out from under USDR&E and mandated to be a direct report to the Secretary of Defense. So they're an autonomous agency. And now the Undersecretary for R&E being in control quasi puts that back underneath. What they're thinking at the DoD or what direction they're getting from Congress, I don't want to speculate on that, but right now it kind of looks like we may see something happen there. I don't know what the future of that organization is. I know that they've done great work. I also know that they are a open sore point of contention for lots in the industry who have had a hard time working with them. It's just life and doing business in defense, but there could be some restructuring there going on to potentially bring them back to core principles. Who knows? What I do know is this DoD has been very aggressive on reconsolidation, streamlining, taking lots of organizations and making them less organizations, right? A flat organization is great, but a wide organization with duplication of efforts is not. So far, since January, we've seen contract consolidation for certain items across government, whole government, under the General Services Administration. If you're buying toilet paper, pens, pencils, you should not be paying more than somebody else is. And the only way to do that is put it under one buyer. GSA is really good at this. So you've seen consolidations of certain contracts all come up under GSA. You've seen a lot of FAR policy changes and acquisition reform that is streamlining closing offices and making things easier to do business. This is in line with that. We've seen Army force structure change where we've had Futures Command, Trade and ForceCom all come under one new T2 command so that we have the training, the force generation and design, and the future concepts and generational modernization efforts all in one house. It just makes too much sense. And very recently, this week, we saw the Navy decide that they are going to consolidate all of their unmanned systems offices into one PEO. So you're going to have a super PEO for everything robotic, autonomous, and AI, which is genius because I can tell you for a fact across the Navy, there are lots of offices doing unmanned systems. They don't always talk to each other. Lots of times they compete with each other, and that is not good for all of the great companies that are trying to participate in the very obvious need and requirement of thousands, if not millions, of surface vessels and undersea vessels that are robotic and autonomous to deter and, if required, defeat the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army that is 4 times as big as ours. So DIU, what is going to happen with DIU? I don't know, but there's a lot of restructuring going on. But I did find an interesting paper, put a link to it. Stanford's Gordian Knot Center, which famously is one of the big contributors, is Mr. Steve Blank, in my opinion, the godfather of Silicon Valley. They do really great things out there. They have the likes of, Mad Dog Mattis and H.R. McMaster out there all the time, thinking big thoughts and, continuing to lead in whatever way they can. But they put out a paper and it was called "The Air Force Needs a PE for Commercials, a Program Executive Office for Commercial Technologies." The opening line of the paper is, "We propose that the Department of the Air Force establish a Program Executive Office Commercial to acquire proven commercial technologies for urgent needs not addressed by existing acquisition program." That is actually the fucking definition of DIU. That's what they are. DIU is PEO commercial for the whole DoD. So JPO, Joint Program Executive Office, commercial. That's their fucking job. On one end, you got DARPA that's doing Manhattan Project shit that no one in the commercial industry can or should be doing. That's their job. 6-1 research. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, you got the shit that Army Futures Command is doing with like 400 kilowatt high power lasers that have battery packs as big as 18-wheeler trucks to shoot fucking fighter jets out of the air. Okay. No one in the commercial industry is coming to the table with that. That's not a Lockheed, Boeing, Raytheon that's being directed to make that by the DoD. Okay, so you got Manhattan Project shit over here. You got space lasers over here. There's an overarching, hey, this is super, super, super duper secret, and SCO is going to take care of that. But everything in the middle of that is commercially available, should never go onto a development contract. It's DIU's responsibility to know and buy things that can be bought today. They are the Joint Program Office for commercial. So if anyone wanted to listen to the ramblings of a madman, I would just say DIU, Undersecretary Michael, if you're thinking about restructuring DIU, just make them PEO commercial. Whether they live in R&E or they remain a SecDef direct report, irrelevant. The scope and charter of that organization should be buy everything between Manhattan Project and space lasers. I digress. Also, over August, the DoD likes to do things in August when Congress is like at home and they can't do anything about it. The DoD launched the Anti-Drone Task Force. Okay, so this is actually very, very fundamental. There used to be a Joint Program Office for counter UAS. It lacked significant authorities in the way that it was structured and set up, and it really just didn't have any teeth. It was like the dudes who sat around and thought about it, but couldn't do anything about it. So Secretary Hegseth set up Joint Interagency Task Force 401. It is to expedite the delivery of counter UAS systems across the Department of Defense. Great charter. Sounds kind of like the old thing. What's different? First, direct report to SecDef. Okay, so what's different? There's a laundry list. 1, direct report to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Basically, the dude who runs the inner workings of the DoD. That's exactly where you want this. 2, it gets rid of and or takes over the responsibilities of what has been previously known as Replicator 2. That's the counter UAS initiative that was run at the DoD level. It's taking over all those responsibilities. They're going to have authorities, which we're going to talk about in a second, to bypass traditional acquisition processes and recruit and retain high talent, high skilled, high demand, low density type people. Unique hiring authorities are what made DIU so successful. You are not going to get somebody to leave a exploding startup or a giant venture capital firm to come work for a GS-13 paycheck. It's just not going to happen. You have to have special hiring authorities that can get them on board quick. You can expedite their clearances, and you can pay them something even slightly close to what they're walking away from because they want to serve their country. So they're going to have that as well, just like DIU. They're also going to take control of all research, development, testing, and evaluation for counter UAS, which is great because right now that lives all over the fucking place. So now there's a responsibility. If someone's not in charge of it, no one's in charge of it, right? Most importantly, the Task Force 401 director will have acquisition authority up to $50 million per initiative. That, at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, is the teeth that the old organization didn't have. They can tell you what they want all day, but if they got to go beg a service secretary to dig into their budget and find money for something that they didn't want to spend it on in the first place, good luck. Now they have acquisition authority of up to $50 million per initiative. And now go back to the reconciliation money, read the reconciliation bill. It's counter UAS, counter UAS, counter UAS. There's billions of dollars in there that they'll be able to leverage for these initiatives. What happens after the reconciliation dollars are all spent? I have no fucking idea. But for right now, in the near term, in the now to 2027 problem, in the push for Golden Dome, they have billions of dollars on hand through reconciliation and now the acquisition authority to use them. Another highlight note before we get into the biggest news in generations, if not our lifetime. Yes, I'm burying the lead. On the VC funding side, some good notes of light at the end of the tunnel came out. Year to date, almost $29 billion was raised in the VC community around defense tech. Now, sure, somebody's going to go in there and pick the methodology on the numbers apart. But there has been a fundraising and fund deploying slump for a while. And this is a great sign to see a good year-to-date number that more money is coming into venture, which ultimately then means going into venture companies. But very specifically in Q1, $1.4 billion was invested in defense and dual-use startups. So that's a great first quarter of seeing an additional $1 billion in investments. When we talk about $1 trillion defense budget, I want to see $1 trillion of defense investing to match that year over year coming from the private sector, right? That buys down the RDT&E costs. It buys down the time because commercial companies working on venture money work a lot faster than, say, a Navy lab. But also, with the new buying procedures, there will be a turning point where the more money you put in and the faster you work, the more contracts you get as these antiquated methodologies in the FAR and the acquisitions processes are stripped away and continue to be implemented across the DoD. So this money coming in, I don't know, somebody will probably do a PhD study on it, but we'll probably have this bulk of money that we're going to get in the 25 year will probably have more impact and more returns in a very real way in terms of contracts than all of the money previously put in, which isn't saying, hey, not thanks for putting in your money earlier, right? If you got in on venture and defense 5 years ago, you were a maverick, right? Like, we're glad people did that. I'm just saying, like, if you're an investor, don't back out of defense, get more into defense because we're going to be able to buy things in a better way. And it's really going to help the situation. Okay, last one, JSIDs. This is probably a term that nobody has ever heard before. But when we talk about what's wrong with the Department of Defense and why we have a valley of death, it's mostly because of JSIDs. It's somewhat due to the budgeting process, the Congress and the appropriations and the CRs and the, shutdowns and all that kind of stuff. But it's also due to JSIDs. And it's due to JSIDs because JSIDs is a process that takes the DoD 800 days to decide if they want something just to begin with. We're not talking about budgeting for it. We're not talking about planning for it. We're not talking about passing it through Congress and appropriations bill. I'm saying it takes the DoD on average 800 days to decide if they want something. That thing's dead. There may be no bigger piece of defense reform that will directly impact everyone who is in this space than this for the remainder of their life. This is equal to Goldwater Nichols and any other significant piece of legislation that has been passed. This is the National Security Act of 1946 level shit, right? So, all good. On August 20th, SecDef Pete Hegseth said, kill that shit. Boom. Done. It ended what was known as the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, or the JROC. This was where all the senior leaders from across all the military services got together and fought over what we should buy for 800 days. That's dead. The JROC's new focus is, in a greater sense, the largest DoD version of a CSO or an open topic. They are going to be required to come up with what is called key operational problems. Key operational problems will be our senior military leaders, the joint staff, getting together and saying, what are our, hypothetically, top 10 biggest national security defense issues? Right now, everybody knows the top two, Indo-PACOM and defense of the homeland, Golden Dome. Depending on the day, you pick which one it is, but it's number one and number two. I tell people all the time, if you're going to go talk to the DoD, you need to know where your thing falls on their list of priorities. Because, look, having lived in Camp Lejeune in some shitty barracks back in the day, I want somebody to deal with the mold problem. I do, believe me. But if you're going up talking to Congress or talking to the DoD about this latest and greatest mold reduction thing that's going to cost $100 million, they're going to be like, yo, bro, like I'm trying to do hypersonic missiles over here. You're just not a priority, and that's the fact. When I ask people where you are in the DoD priority, that's not a subjective question. That is quantifiable. You show me where in a strategic document it says do the thing that you're doing. If you don't, you're going to have a hard road in this. Now, the Joint Staff is going to be required to define what these problems are. I am praying that they are going to have an unclassified version of this so that industry knows how to respond appropriately. Free advice, DoD. I don't know. So basically, that's what the J.A.R is now going to do. The J.A.R is now going to decide what the top priorities are and then get the fuck out of the way. The new RAB, the Requirements Resourcing Alignment Board, co-chaired by the Vice Chief of the Joint Staff and the Deputy Secretary of Defense, will rank and allocate resources to those problems. This is going to happen, and this is still squishy. We're figuring out what this looks like. But this will happen in a process called the J.A.R, the Joint Acceleration Reserve, not to be confused with RADER, the Rapid Defense Experimentation Reserve. I think that's what it was. This is not asking Congress for money. This is the DoD holding back a large portion of what they would typically allocate to line item entries in the budget and saying, no. We're going to hold back a bunch of our budget planning. And once we figure out what these top 10 things are, we are going to first and foremost allocate the resources to this. This is what you saw come out of Indo-PACOM with the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. It is like, hey, these are my priorities that I need to solve before anything else. It doesn't matter if we get, I don't know, enterprise software in the DoD right or cloud computing right if the Pentagon is a smoking hole of a nuclear crater. It's like, we just got to get the priorities right. And that's what this is going to do. They're going to hold back some money. They're going to plan for this. And amazingly, they are going to resource the things they say they need, not wait 3 years to do it. So we're going to see a process where we have key operational problems that go into the RAB that then get combined from development through procurement and acquisition to purchasing through USDR&E mission capabilities and mission engineering into the J.A.R, which will be a set aside that they plan before they go to Congress, genius, to resource these things. The Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell and the Joint Urgent Operational Needs statements of the past of having to say, oh shit, everybody in the Middle East is getting their fucking arms and legs blown off. Maybe we should build an MRAP so that they have an armored vehicle so they don't get blown up. That process is essentially the spirit of how they're trying to do this, where they see the priorities and then they rapidly resource, fund, and acquire these things. This is the right way to do things. Everyone knows it's the right way to do things. And finally, they're getting out of the way of their own paperwork to do it. So what you're going to see out of this, and this is why it matters, the DoD is going to publish operational problems. The COCOMs, the combatant commands, the warfighters, Indo-PACOM, CENTCOM, EUCOM, the Marines in MAR-4 PAC that are going to have to fight the war against China, are going to feed these key operational problems. The services, not the J.A.R, but the services are going to validate their own requirements. So now you're not going to have an Army general telling a Navy admiral he doesn't need another ship. Ridiculous. So services are going to validate their own needs. The J.A.R will be there to resource this before it goes to Congress, they'll be able to pull out, hey, here's our key operational problems and here's how we're resourcing them. I can't wait to see a clean budget documentation that does this. Less paperwork, more outcomes. And at the end of the day, the DoD leadership right now is demanding speed, lethality, iteration, adaption, agility, and engagement. And this is where startups, small businesses are going to do the best. Know what they're asking for, learn the process, get in front of the users, get in front of the leaders, and get your shit out there. This is going to be a rapidly fast-moving object. Stay tuned. If you have any questions, hit me up. Happy to answer any questions. I will see you next time. Thank you very much for your time. Get out there, learn more, know more, sell more. Later, y'all.